Assalamu alaikum students, a very good morning to you all. I hope you all are safe and doing well. Yesterday you started acid peptic disease. Professor Saab beautifully explained you the pathway of HCl secretion, the signs and symptoms and complications of acid peptic disease, its pathogenesis, and which treatment options are available to treat acid peptic disease, and antacids were also discussed in detail. So inshallah today I'll be continuing the lecture and we will be discussing the remaining drug groups which are used for treating acid peptic disease. But before that I want you to recall the pathway of HCl secretion so that you can have a clear cut picture of that in your mind, and the mechanism of action of the remaining drugs would be a lot more easier to understand. I would like to emphasize one thing. Yesterday I realized that you guys don't go through the lecture properly. You just see the slides and you don't listen to the content. So please keep your notebooks by your sides and note down the important points, because we cannot write each and everything on the slide. We are saying a lot of things along with the slides and you have to note them down. Okay. So let's have a quick recap. This is a very beautiful picture to explain the synthesis of HCl, but you don't have to memorize it and you don't have to practice it. You won't be getting this diagram in your exams, but it is very important to understand, okay? So what is shown here, the important thing is that HCl is secreted from the parietal cells. And the parietal cells are stimulated by acetylcholine, histamine, and gastrin to secrete HCl, and it is then secreted across the parietal cell canalicular membrane by proton pump into the lumen. So if you want to decrease the secretion of this acid, how it can be decreased? Either you give something which will block the muscarinic receptor, or histamine receptor, or gastrin receptor. But the best thing is you can block this pump, this proton pump, the hydrogen potassium ATPase. So let's see which drugs are available for this. The muscarinic antagonists which are used in acid peptic disease are pyrenzapine and telanzapine, but they are not commonly used, therefore we won't be discussing them, and you have already read them when you did the parasympathetic system. Then the H2 receptor blockers, gastrin blockers are not available yet, and the proton pump inhibitors. So the therapy is basically based on the pathogenesis of this disease. So if you want to explore the treatment options, you have to dig more and more into its pathogenesis. And we know the pathogenesis is due to imbalance between the aggressive factors and the defensive factors. So management can be done by targeting at either the aggressive factors or the mucosal defensive factors. You can increase the defensive factors and you can counteract the aggressive factors. So these were the aggressive factors. We can give the antimuscarinic drugs, the H2 blockers, and proton pump inhibitors. Clear? So these were the points which we discussed in detail. So according to its pathogenesis, these drug groups have been discovered and they are being used. Antacids, you are done with it. They just neutralize the acid. Then the major group is anti-secretory, which will decrease the production of the HCl. And these are the H2 blockers, the antimuscarinic drugs, and proton pump inhibitors. Then are the mucosal protective agents. The main mucosal protective agent, you know, it is prostaglandin. The prostaglandin E1, E2. They are the housekeepers. They protect the gastric mucosa from the aggressive factors, right? So misoprostol can be used, sucralfate and bismuth compounds, and we'll be discussing them shortly. And if the peptic ulcer is due to a bacteria which is H. pylori, then you have to give antibiotics for that. So let's have a look at today's learning objectives. By the end of today's lecture, you should be able to write down the mechanism of action, uses and adverse effects of H2 antagonists, proton pump inhibitors, and mucosal protective agents. And you should be able to write down the triple and quadruple therapy for H. pylori eradication. These are very important university questions as well, and acid peptic disease is a very important topic from examination point of view. So the first group is the agents that reduce intragastric acidity. You have done the antacids yesterday. The next class is H2 receptor antagonists. They were introduced in 1970s and till early 90s they were most commonly prescribed drugs. These drugs they end in tidine. You can see cimetidine, ranitidine, famotidine, nizatidine. They are commonly available, they are over-the-counter drugs, and you must have heard about ranitidine. It is available by the name of Zantac. Uh, by the end of last year, FDA requested to withdraw it from the market because it was found that it carries NDMA, which is a human carcinogen, and in higher levels it can produce cancers in humans. Therefore, it was withdrawn from the market. So it was very popular in the media in those days. They all are rapidly absorbed from the intestine. They are available in oral and intravenous formulations. Their half-life is 1 to 4 hours, and they are excreted by a combination of hepatic metabolism, glomerular filtration, and renal tubular secretion. They are usually given twice daily. Its mechanism of action is very important. You can get this question in your exam. It competitively inhibits the parietal cell H2 receptors. Competitively means reversibly it is blocking the parietal cell H2 receptors, and thus it will reduce the volume of gastric secretion and pepsin concentration. It is highly selective for the H2 receptors. It will not block the H1 or H3 receptors. Okay. And please don't confuse the H2 receptors with the second generation H1 receptors, because most of the students when are asked about the second generation H1 receptors they write about the H2 and vice versa. And these drugs are especially effective at inhibiting the nocturnal acid secretion and have a modest impact on the meal stimulated acid secretion. So their main effect is on the nocturnal acid secretion. So when you are giving it twice daily, it's better to give it at the bedtime when you are giving it at night. They are used in the treatment of gastroesophageal reflux disease, peptic ulcer disease, in dyspepsia, which is the heartburn and indigestion, and for prevention of bleeding from stress related gastritis. Almost all these drugs they have similar uses, so you don't have to memorize them. You should just know that they are used in treatment of GERD, in treatment of peptic ulcer, etc. They are usually very safe drugs to be used, but in some patients they can produce headache, fatigue, myalgias, diarrhea, and constipation. And when given intravenously, they can increase the risk of nosocomial pneumonia in critically ill patients, the patients which are in ICU especially. And it produces the mental state effects like confusion, hallucination, agitation, especially when given IV. And these adverse effects are more with cimetidine. Gynecomastia, impotence, and galactorrhea is produced with cimetidine, and when given rapidly through IV route, they produce bradycardia and hypotension. Therefore, they have to be given slowly over 30 minutes when given through IV route, and bradycardia and hypotension occurs due to blockade of the cardiac H2 receptors. But these adverse effects are not very common. They occur in 3% of patients only. They cross the placenta and they are secreted in the breast milk. Therefore, they should be avoided during pregnancy and lactation. They compete with creatinine and procainamide for renal tubular secretion, and cimetidine is a cytochrome P450 inhibitor. So it would have drug interactions. This is a very important university question, and it is often asked in vivas as well, that how does cimetidine differs from other H2 antagonists? So it has weak anti-androgen effect, and therefore when used for long term or in high doses, it will produce gynecomastia or impotence in men and galactorrhea in women. Clear? And why it is having anti-androgen effect? Because it inhibits the binding of dihydrotestosterone to the androgen receptors. It inhibits the metabolism of estradiol and increases serum prolactin levels, and galactorrhea is occurring due to increased serum prolactin levels. It is a potent cytochrome P4 inhibitors, therefore it will have drug interactions as well. So it increases the serum concentrations of warfarin, diazepam, phenytoin, quinidine, carbamazepine, theophylline, etc. because it is cytochrome P450 inhibitor. So next group is proton pump inhibitors. These drugs were introduced in 1980s and since then they have played a major role for the treatment of acid peptic disease, and now they are among the most widely prescribed drugs worldwide due to their extraordinary efficacy and safety. They are most commonly used and they are also available over the counter. You must have seen these drugs in your house. It is available by the name of Ryzac, Omega, etc. So 6 proton pump inhibitors are available. Omeprazole, which is the most common one, it is most commonly used. Its isomer esomeprazole. Lansoprazole, its isomer dexlansoprazole, rabeprazole, and pantoprazole. So all the H2 blockers were ending in etidine, and the proton pump inhibitors are ending in prazole. So they are substituted benzimidazoles and they resemble H2 antagonist in structure, but they have completely different mechanism of action. You can see the resemblance in their structure. They all are available in oral formulations, and esomeprazole and pantoprazole are available in IV form too. They are administered as prodrugs. This is the very important point to remember. The pharmacokinetics of PPIs is really very important, and we will be seeing that why is it so important. They are lipophilic weak bases. They have short half-life of about 1 to 2 hours. However, their duration of action is approximately 24 hours because they are irreversibly blocking the proton pumps. That's why their duration of action is longer than their half-lives. They undergo hepatic metabolism and have negligible renal clearance. Therefore, they are safe to be used in patients with renal insufficiency or with mild to moderate liver disease. And they degrade rapidly at low pH. So which points you need to keep in mind from this slide? That they are prodrugs and they are weak bases and they degrade rapidly at low pH. So different formulations of proton pump inhibitors are available in the market. Since these drugs are basic in nature and they degrade rapidly in the low pH, enteric coated formulations are available to prevent acidic inactivation in the stomach, and after passing through the stomach they enter into the alkaline intestinal lumen where the coatings dissolve and prodrug is absorbed. Lansoprazole is also available in a tablet formulation that disintegrates in mouth or may be mixed with water and administered via oral syringe or enteral tube. Omeprazole is also available in combination with sodium bicarbonate, which will protect the drug from acid degradation. This is the immediate release formulation and it has a rapid absorption and thus faster onset of action. It is available in the form of a capsule or sachet. The enteric coated drugs, the formulations are the delayed release formulations. So if someone needs rapid relief, so we'll give him this powder formulation. And these drugs can also be given intravenously through infusion or bolus injections. So for children or patients with dysphagia or who are on enteral tubes, the capsule formulations can be opened and granules are mixed with apple or orange juice or some other juice and then given to the patient. So how these drugs should be given or at what time these drugs should be given. They should be administered on an empty stomach because their bioavailability is decreased around 50% by the presence of food. So they are given on an empty stomach approximately 1 hour before a meal, usually a breakfast, so that the peak concentration of the drug coincides with the maximal activity of proton pump secretion. And these drugs, they inactivate the acid pumps that are actively secreting. They are not effective on the non-secretory vesicles. They may require 3 to 4 days of treatment to achieve their full effectiveness, because all the pumps are not inactivated with a single dose. So the drug will require 3 to 4 days to show its complete action. And similarly, when we'll stop the drug, it will take 3 to 4 days for full acid secretion to return. From the pharmacokinetic perspective, we can say that these are ideal drugs because they have short serum half-life, they are concentrated and activated near their site of action, and they have long duration of action. So what is their mechanism of action? They inhibit the final common pathway of gastric acid secretion, that is the proton pump, the hydrogen potassium ATPase, and they irreversibly block it, unlike the H2 blockers which reversibly block the H2 receptors and thus reduce gastric acidity. And how is this happening? Let's check out. So, after intestinal absorption, the prodrug diffuses into the parietal cell canaliculi, where it becomes protonated and concentrated more than 1000-fold. Here you have to recall the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. So here trapping occurs. It is then converted into its active form, which is a sulfinamide cation that forms a covalent bond with parietal cell hydrogen potassium ATPase and irreversibly inactivates it. Clear? So when you get this question in the exam, you have to write it like this, that after intestinal absorption, the drug will go into the parietal cell canaliculi, it will become protonated and concentrated, it will be converted into its active form, which will form a covalent bond with parietal cell hydrogen potassium ATPase and irreversibly inactivate it. Clear? So it inhibits both fasting and meal stimulated secretion and has also effect on the nocturnal acid secretion. And as they are blocking the final common pathway of acid secretion, so they will inhibit 90 to 98% of 24-hour acid secretion, whereas the H2 blockers were inhibiting only 60 to 70% of total 24 hours acid. This graph is showing the intragastric acidity. This is the amount of acid produced over 24-hour period time. Clear? So the red line, this shows the pre-treatment levels of gastric acid. You can see that it increases post-meal and at night time from 9 p.m. till 8 a.m. The levels are really increased. The blue line is when H2 blockers are given, and green line is proton pump inhibitors. From this graph, you can see that H2 blockers have marked effect on the nocturnal acid secretion. See, this was the one before treatment and this is after using H2 blockers. They have marked effect on the nocturnal acid secretion and modest effect on the post-meal secretion of the gastric acid. Whereas the proton pump inhibitors, they markedly suppress the meal stimulated secretion of the gastric acid as well as the nocturnal acid secretion. So these are the differences between H2 blockers and proton pump inhibitors. One difference was that H2 blockers are reversible blockers. Proton pump inhibitors irreversibly block the proton pump, and H2 blockers, they are given twice daily, whereas proton pump inhibitors can be given once daily or twice daily depending upon the dosage. And H2 blockers have more effect on the nocturnal acid secretion only, and proton pump inhibitors equally affect the meal stimulated and nocturnal acid secretion. Clear? Coming to the clinical uses of proton pump inhibitors, they are used as a first-line therapy to treat gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. They are also used to prevent and treat the esophageal complications and extraesophageal complications of GERD, like the esophageal stricture, Barrett's esophagus, asthma, cough, laryngitis, and non-cardiac chest pain. They are very effective against GERD. They are more effective than H2 blockers. The next clinical indication is peptic ulcer disease. Proton pump inhibitors provide rapid symptomatic relief and also heal the ulcers very fast. Either it is due to H. pylori or NSAID, and they're also used to prevent rebleeding from the peptic ulcers. In case of NSAID associated ulcers, first of all, we have to stop the NSAID, but if we can't stop NSAIDs and we have to give them to the patient, then we should opt for the selective COX-2 inhibitors. And proton pump inhibitors are really a very good choice to treat NSAID associated ulcers. Then they can be given in case of non-ulcer dyspepsia for the prevention of stress-related mucosal bleeding and Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is a gastrin-producing tumor in which there is hypersecretion of HCl. Now the adverse effects. These drugs are usually very safe and adverse effects occur very infrequently like diarrhea, abdominal pain, headache, acute interstitial nephritis. Then there are adverse effects on nutrition. As we all know that acid is very important in releasing vitamin B12 from the food. So it can decrease the absorption of vitamin B12, and acid is also required for the absorption of food-bound minerals like calcium, magnesium and iron, and with prolonged therapy it will decrease calcium absorption and will increase the risk of hip fracture, and in very rare cases it can cause severe life-threatening hypomagnesemia. Gastric acid is also an important barrier to the ingested pathogens. So, prolonged use of proton pump inhibitors can increase the risk of respiratory infections, both the community acquired and hospital acquired, as well as they can increase the risk of hospital and community acquired Clostridium difficile infection, which is pseudomembranous colitis, and they can increase the risk of other enteric infections as well, for example Salmonella, Shigella, E. coli and Campylobacter. Prolonged use can also cause hypergastrinemia because gastrin levels are regulated by intragastric acidity, and acid suppression will alter the normal feedback inhibition of gastrin, therefore it will increase, its level will increase. So now the drug interactions, as it is decreasing the gastric acidity, it will uh, impair the absorption of the drugs which need acidic environment for absorption like ketoconazole, itraconazole, digoxin and atazanavir. Omeprazole may inhibit the metabolism of warfarin, diazepam and phenytoin, and Rabi and pantoprazole have no significant drug interactions. Another important drug interaction is that FDA issued a warning about potentially important adverse interaction between clopidogrel and proton pump inhibitors. Clopidogrel is an inactive drug and it requires cytochrome P450 metabolism for its activation, and because omeprazole is inhibiting it, so clopidogrel will not get activated when given along with proton pump inhibitors. But clinically significant drug interactions are rare because the half-life of these drugs is really very short. So pause your video for 5 minutes and take a short break. We'll be discussing the remaining drugs afterwards. Okay. Now are the mucosal protective agents. So we are done with the drugs that were anti-secretory. We discussed H2 blockers and proton pump inhibitors today. Let's revise them. The important points of H2 blockers were that they reversibly block the parietal cell H2 receptors and decrease the gastric production and also the pepsin concentration, and they are used in treatment of GERD and peptic ulcer and for the to prevent bleeding from stress ulcers as well, and they were also safe as PPIs are safe, but their adverse effects were really limited. The important thing was the difference between cimetidine and other H2 blockers. Cimetidine had weak anti-androgenic effect and it produces gynecomastia, impotence and galactorrhea, and it has drug interactions because it inhibits cytochrome P450. And proton pump inhibitors They are the most commonly used drugs nowadays: omeprazole, rabeprazole, pantoprazole, lansoprazole, etc. They irreversibly block the hydrogen potassium ATPase, which is the final common pathway of gastric acid secretion. They are available as prodrugs, and after intestinal absorption, the prodrug they diffuse into the parietal cell canaliculi, where it gets protonated and concentrated more than 1000 folds. It is converted to its active form, which is sulfinamide cation. It will bind to the hydrogen potassium ATPase and will irreversibly block it. Clear? And they have marked effect on the meal stimulated and nocturnal acid secretion. And they are first line therapy for GERD, and it is also used in the H. pylori eradication regimen. Now are the mucosal protective agents. First one is sucralfate. As you can see from the name, it has sucrose, aluminium, and sulfate. Sucralfate is a salt of sucrose complex to sulfated aluminum hydroxide. It is a small poorly soluble molecule, and it breaks down into sucrose sulfate, which is strongly negatively charged, and an aluminum salt. Only less than 3% of the intact drug and aluminum is absorbed from the intestine, and rest is excreted in feces. So it is having aluminum, so what will it do? It will produce constipation or diarrhea. Constipation, right? Aluminum salts, they produce constipation, and magnesium salts, they produce diarrhea. Now its mechanism of action. The mechanism of action of sucralfate is really important. It often comes in exams. So the important point is that it polymerizes in the acidic environment of the stomach. So you cannot give this drug along with proton pump inhibitors, H2 blockers, or antacids, because it needs acidic environment for polymerization. The negatively charged sucrose sulfate binds to positively charged proteins in the base of ulcers or erosion, forming a protective coating over ulcer beds. Since it is a mucosal protective agent, it will form a protective coating over ulcer beds. Clear? It also stimulates mucosal prostaglandin and bicarbonate secretion. And this drug is given 4 times a day. So let's see its mechanism of action. When the drug is given, it forms a protective coating over the ulcer. And how it is forming the protective coating? Because the negatively charged sucrose, sulfated sucrose, it will bind with the positive charges of the ulcer, and in this way it will polymerize. It will form a sort of a meshwork over the ulcer, and it will protect it from acid, and it will also increase the prostaglandin and mucus secretion. It forms a viscous tenacious paste which covers this ulcer base. It is used for the prevention of stress ulcers and in treatment of duodenal ulcers, and it is not frequently used because we have to give it 4 times a day, and it really affects the compliance of the patient. The H2 blockers and PPIs are really good because once daily dosing is enough in case of PPIs. So its adverse effects and drug interactions: as it is not absorbed, so it is devoid of systemic effects. Only the small amount of aluminum which is absorbed, it will produce constipation, and they result in bezoar formation because it forms a tenacious paste which can produce obstructive lump, and it gets stuck in stomach. That is known as bezoar. It should not be used for prolonged periods in patients with renal insufficiency, and sucralfate may bind to other medications, impairing their absorption as well. Like it can bind to fluoroquinolones, theophylline, tetracyclines, digoxin, etc. So it is a safe drug to be given because it is not absorbed systemically. Next group is prostaglandin analogs. Misoprostol is the drug used, and it is a methyl analog of prostaglandin E1, which is a housekeeper prostaglandin. It is cytoprotective. It is given orally, it is rapidly absorbed, serum half-life is less than 30 minutes. It also has to be given 3 to 4 times a day, and it is excreted in the urine. It increases mucosal protection and inhibits acid secretion, stimulates mucus and bicarbonate secretion, and enhances mucosal blood flow. Okay, and in addition, it binds to prostaglandin receptor on parietal cells, reducing histamine stimulated cyclic AMP production and causing modest acid inhibition. So it is providing mucosal protection and it is inhibiting the acid secretion as well. So it is having dual action. But still it is not used very frequently because it has to be given 3 to 4 times a day and it has high adverse effect profile. Its only clinical use is for the prevention of NSAID-induced ulcers in high-risk patients. High-risk patients are like elderly patients or the patients who already have a history of peptic ulcer. And if they have to be given NSAIDs, they can be given misoprostol for prevention of NSAID-induced ulcers. You can get this question in exams as well because this is its only clinical indication. It can produce diarrhea and cramping abdominal pain, and it should not be used during pregnancy or in women of childbearing potential because it stimulates uterine contractions. So if a person in childbearing age has to be given this drug, we first have to get her pregnancy test done, and if it's negative and the patient is using some contraception, then only we will prescribe this drug to that patient. Next mucosal protective agent is bismuth. Bismuth is available in two formulations. The non-prescription formulation is the bismuth subsalicylate. The other one is bismuth subcitrate potassium. Bismuth subsalicylate undergoes rapid dissociation into bismuth and salicylate within the stomach. And over 99% of the bismuth appears in the stool and only less than 1% is absorbed, and salicylate is readily absorbed and excreted in the urine as was in the case of aspirin. So it has multiple actions. It forms protective coating over the ulcerated tissue. It also stimulates prostaglandin mucus and bicarbonate secretion. It has direct antimicrobial activity against H. pylori, and it sequesters the enterotoxins. It is used for treating dyspepsia. It is available in tablet and liquid form. It is also used in treatment of acute infectious diarrhea because it reduces the stool frequency and liquidity, and the salicylate will inhibit the intestinal prostaglandin and chloride secretion. And it is used to prevent traveler's diarrhea because of its antimicrobial effect, and it also binds the enterotoxins. So these are three clinical uses: dyspepsia, acute infectious diarrhea, and prevention of traveler's diarrhea. This question can come in exam. Bismuth has excellent safety profile. As we read earlier that more than 99% of the drug is excreted in feces, so it can produce harmless black discoloration of the stool. But we have to tell the patient about this adverse effect, otherwise he can confuse it with GI bleeding. And if given in liquid form, it can produce harmless blackening of the tongue. This is blackening or discoloration of the tongue. So we have to tell about these adverse effects to the patient. It is really important. And if its excretion is impaired, it can result in bismuth toxicity, which can cause encephalopathy, and the patient can present with ataxia, headaches, confusion, and seizures. But this will occur only if the renal excretion is impaired and bismuth is absorbed in a larger quantity. Otherwise, this is a very safe drug. So the last drug group which is used for management of acid peptic disease are the antibiotics. And antibiotics are used in the cases in which H. pylori is involved. H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, is a gram-negative spiral bacteria, and patients with peptic ulcer disease infected with H. pylori require antimicrobial treatment. Sometimes it happens that a patient comes to you for the treatment of acid peptic disease and you have treated him well. The patient improves, but he keeps on coming again and again and again because the peptic ulcer is recurring again and again. So H. pylori is the major cause of recurrence of peptic ulcer. If the patient is suffering from H. pylori and his peptic ulcer is due to H. pylori, you cannot cure him with just giving a proton pump inhibitor. You have to eradicate this pathogen. So eradication of H. pylori will decrease the rate of recurrence of the disease. And H. pylori infection can be diagnosed by endoscopic biopsy or through some non-invasive tests like serology, stool test and urea breath test. So we give combination of 2 antibiotics and a proton pump inhibitor to eradicate H. pylori. Single antibiotic is not used because resistance will develop. So these are the antibiotics that are used in treatment of H. pylori induced peptic ulcer: clarithromycin, amoxicillin, metronidazole and tetracycline. Clarithromycin is a macrolide, amoxicillin belongs to the penicillin group, metronidazole you know that is Flagyl, and tetracycline belongs to the tetracycline group. Two treatment regimens are available for eradication of H. pylori. One is the triple therapy in which 3 drugs are used as the name shows, and the other one is quadruple therapy in it 4 drugs are being used. And the best regimen is for 14 days. So triple therapy is mostly used and it is also first line therapy because compliance won't be an issue in this case because all the 3 drugs are given twice daily, whereas in quadruple therapy the drugs are given 4 times daily. So in that case compliance would be an issue. So the drugs which we give are proton pump inhibitors, clarithromycin and amoxicillin, because in triple therapy we have to give 2 antibiotics and 1 proton pump inhibitor. So proton pump inhibitor, either omeprazole or any other one, 20 milligram twice daily, plus clarithromycin 500 milligram twice daily, and amoxicillin 1 gram twice daily. And if the patient is allergic to penicillins, we can give metronidazole 500 milligram twice daily, and all these drugs are given for 14 days. And after the completion of triple therapy, the PPIs should be continued once daily for 4 to 6 weeks. Clear? So sequential treatment is also available, which is for 10 days. The previous one was for 14 days, but these drugs can be given for 10 days as well. Uh, During the first 5 days, we give PPI 20 milligram twice daily with 1 gram amoxicillin twice daily. And from day 6 onwards, we give PPI 20 milligram twice daily with clarithromycin 500 milligram twice daily and tinidazole 500 milligram twice daily. So the most important thing is you should know the names of the drugs. If you don't know their proper dose, please don't write the wrong doses in the exam. Okay, if you don't know the dose, no problem, but please don't write the wrong doses. Now is the quadruple therapy, in which 4 drugs are used and they are given 4 times daily for 10 to 14 days. PPI 20 milligram twice daily is given with bismuth subsalicylate 524 milligram, tetracycline 500 milligram and metronidazole 500 milligram for 4 times daily for 10 to 14 days. PPIs are never given more than twice daily. Okay, so let's revise the triple and quadruple therapy. In triple therapy we were having proton pump inhibitor with 2 antibiotics. So proton pump inhibitor, clarithromycin and amoxicillin are given twice daily for 14 days, and if the person is allergic to penicillins, we give metronidazole instead of amoxicillin twice daily for 14 days, and then the PPIs are continued for 4 to 6 weeks once daily. And in quadruple therapy, we give PPI twice daily with bismuth subsalicylate, tetracyclines and metronidazole 4 times daily for 10 to 14 days. Now it's time for some MCQs. And this would be your assignment for today's lecture. And your attendance will be marked on the basis of these MCQs. You don't have to write the statement of the MCQ, just write the question number and its answer A, B, C. So first question, Which drug accumulates in the parietal cell canaliculi and undergoes conversion to a derivative that irreversibly inhibits hydrogen potassium ATPase? Also write down the name of its active derivative. Is it cimetidine, diphenoxylate, esomeprazole, metoclopramide, or sulfasalazine? A 45-year-old man with a duodenal ulcer was treated with a combination of drugs to heal the mucosal damage and to eradicate H. pylori. Which of the following antibacterial drugs is used commonly to eradicate intestinal H. pylori? Cefazolin, ciprofloxacin, clarithromycin, clindamycin, or vancomycin? This is a small molecule that polymerizes in stomach acid and coats the ulcer bed, resulting in accelerated healing and reduction of symptoms. Aluminium hydroxide, cimetidine, metoclopramide, omeprazole, or sucralfate. So if you have any question, you can ask me in your WhatsApp group and I will get back to you as soon as possible. One thing I forgot to tell you that if a patient develops resistance to clarithromycin, then also we switch to quadruple therapy, because clarithromycin was an important drug in the triple therapy. In that case, the quadruple therapy would become the first line therapy. Okay. So please go through the lecture properly. Take care of yourselves. Have a good day. Allah Hafiz.